Hi, I'm Katy McCown. Welcome to this study on She Belongs, Finding Your Place in the Body of Christ. I'm so glad you're here. As we approach a topic like belonging in the body of Christ, you may be feeling a variety of ways. Maybe community in the body of Christ is something you think you need, but you never seem to find time for it, and you don't really know how in the world you could possibly fit one more thing into your already packed schedule. Maybe you feel the anxiousness and exhaustion that comes from trying to handle life on your own. And while you're not convinced belonging in the body of Christ is the answer, you know you have to try something or else you'll fall apart. Or it could be that you desire a sense of deeper belonging, but you aren't sure how to get beyond the fragments of your broken heart that seem to stand between you and the belonging you long to experience. No matter what has brought you to this study, as we begin our journey together, I want you to know I understand. I grew up in church. I've attended local churches and small groups all over the country. I know it's not always easy, and if I'm being honest, there have been times in my life that belonging in the body of Christ has felt more like something I'm supposed to do rather than something I want to do. It's not lost on me how closely related the word people is to the word problem. I mean, think about it. Change the E to an R, flip the P upside down and add an M. And just like that, people becomes problem. It reminds me a little bit of how I feel when I take a road trip. I learned from my papa that there is one way to travel in a car. You fill the car up with gas, get into the car, buckle your seatbelt, and go. Then you drive until one of two things happens. Either you arrive at your destination or the car runs low on fuel and you need to stop and refill. If neither of those situations are present, then you do not, for any reason, stop. If you need to go to the bathroom, hold it until you stop for gas or get to where you're going. If you're hungry or thirsty, you can get something to eat or drink when we stop for gas or arrive at our destination. It's really very simple. And when I am traveling alone in my car, that is exactly what happens every time. I bring snacks and strategically eat them in intervals of time to last me until the next scheduled stop. And I very carefully sip on my drink so I don't have to stop unscheduled. My method is efficient and, in my opinion, tried and true. However, when I have passengers in my car, somehow they don't always agree with my road trip rules. Oftentimes, if not every time, when people travel with me, I hear a voice from the back seat say, "I need to go to the bathroom." And of course, they say this when we are nowhere near our next stop. My kids have done this. My parents have done this. Even my husband has asked me to stop in the middle of a road trip when we did not need gas and we were not arriving at our destination. Road trips with other people knock me off my schedule. They almost always take longer, and they definitely require me to alter my agenda more than if I were traveling alone. And I think sometimes life can feel that way too. We have a plan about where we're going and how we're going to get there. We make arrangements to accomplish our plan, and the thought of adding people to the plan would only knock it off course. People can seem to slow us down or complicate things, so you may wonder, isn't it better if I just walk the road of life all alone? The very least, keep a safe distance between me and the people who could potentially slow me down, let me down, or knock me down. I've asked these same questions, but here's what I've discovered. Our quest to keep it together all on our own will eventually cause us to fall apart. A recent study reported that nearly half of Americans said they felt lonely or left out sometimes or always. And the church is not insulated from this problem. One recent study reported that 1 in 3 practicing Christians stopped attending church during the COVID-19 pandemic. This study defines practicing Christians as people who believe faith is very important in their lives and had attended church prior to the pandemic. This same study reports that those no longer attending church bear more emotional burdens. Satan wants to trick us into thinking the place where we are the safest, belonging in the body of Christ, is actually dangerous because he knows that if he can get us separated and alone, we are actually the most vulnerable to his attempts to destroy our lives. We are currently living in some of the most alienated, isolated days in history. In these days of social media, we share a lot, but in all our sharing, we share only a little of our real lives. What you will learn as we go through this study together is that we were designed to live in community. This isn't a man-made idea, it's God's design, and it's Jesus's example. Jesus shared his life with others. Jesus called 12 men who followed him everywhere. Together, they shared miracles and ordinary Monday mornings. As Jesus shared every minute with these men, he showed them how God handles not only the big things, but also the daily details that add up to a life of great impact and influence. Because we belong to Jesus, we do not have to live anxious, alienated, and alone. Instead, we can live in community and on mission for him. When we belong to Jesus, we belong to his body. Mental and emotional and even physical health benefits abound for those living in strong community with one another. When we belong to Jesus, we also enjoy the powerful spiritual benefits that come from living in community with other believers. What you'll learn over the course of the next 5 weeks is that there is a peace, security, and purpose that is most completely realized when you engage with other believers and belong in the body of Christ. So let's define belonging, shall we? One definition of belonging is the feeling of security and support when there is a sense of acceptance, inclusion, and identity for a member of a certain group. You may not feel anywhere close to the security and support described in this definition of belonging. Past sins may have shattered your hopes of ever being acceptable to God. Or you may have experienced a broken relationship with a spouse, a friend, a child, or a fellow member of the body of Christ. Maybe it's not your own brokenness you're grappling with, but the brokenness of a world that's unraveling around you. You may have read headlines about church conflict or pondered social media disputes that come across your feed and concluded it's not really possible to belong anywhere this side of heaven. It's true. There is a security that will only be found when sin is no more and we dwell eternally in the perfect presence of God. But I believe we can exist in a broken world and still experience belonging. Because belonging isn't the absence of brokenness, it's the presence of a healer. My goal for this study is for us to live what Paul described in Ephesians 4:16. It says, he makes the whole body fit together perfectly. As each part does its own special work, it helps other parts grow so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. Words like whole, fit together, special work, healthy, growing, and full of love seem so rich with promise, but they may sound quite the opposite of how you feel right now, and that's okay. You're right where you need to be because belonging begins in the midst of our brokenness. Before we go any further, there are 2 things I want you to know right away. First, this isn't a church hurt book. If you've been hurt by someone in the body of Christ, I'm sorry, and I understand. But flawed as we all are, the local church is still God's plan for you and me to give and receive his love on earth. I hope in the weeks to come, we can work through it together and you can take steps towards re-engaging with God's people. Second, this isn't a study meant to address church trauma or abuse. If you have experienced either of these, I encourage you to seek out a qualified Christian counselor. I told you about some of the frustrations of adding travelers to my vehicle and how at times it can seem to slow me down. But I also want to tell you about the other side of that. There have been times I've found blessing and comfort because I was not driving alone in the car. Late at night after a football game, or even the day I made the 2-hour trip home after my dad's funeral service. Those were times I was so thankful I wasn't alone. The presence of my family in the car with me made the long drive home easier to bear. I welcomed the sound of their voices. The road didn't seem as long, and the night didn't seem as dark, because the people I loved accompanied me. God created the body of Christ for us, and he created us for the body of Christ. We need each other. I pray as we travel this road together, you will discover, as I have, the blessings of the body of Christ far outweigh the burdens. What keeps you from believing you could live a life of belonging with Jesus and his body? Through many years of trying to handle life all on my own, I've come to realize I don't want a life that's handled. I want a life that's whole. I'm excited to travel this road together, and I promise to make time for bathroom breaks as needed.